We were 11 people around a table built for 8, and the house smelled like it had always smelled at Christmas. Pine needles and roasting meat, and the particular warmth of a furnace that was older than most of the grandchildren it had kept warm over the years. Grandma sat at the head of the table. She had sat at the head of every Christmas table I could remember, steady, present, the gravitational center of everything. The woman who could quiet a room full of arguing cousins with a single look and who made the same cornbread stuffing every year and who had never, in my 28 years, let December 25th feel like anything less than the most important day of the season. She had not spoken in 8 months. Not since the morning after we buried my grandfather Harold, her husband of 57 years, the man whose chair now sat empty at the other end of the table, the man whose absence shaped the room around it like a wound. She sat quietly through the meal. She ate a little. She watched faces when people talked, with those sharp gray eyes that had always seen more than they let on. She passed the salt when someone reached for it. She was present in every physical sense. But she said nothing. And so, as the meal wound down and the plates were pushed back and the wine glasses were refilled, my family did what they had been doing for months. They talked about her as if she weren't sitting 4 feet away. My Uncle Robert leaned back in his chair and said, in the tone he used for things he had already decided, "We need to finalize the Meadowbrook conversation. The spring timeline is realistic if we start the house assessment in January." Meadowbrook. The care facility with the nice brochure and the walking paths in the photographs and the phrase compassionate environment for seniors with complex needs printed on the front page. I watched Grandma's hands on the table. She reached for a napkin. She took the pen from her cardigan pocket, the same slim black pen she had kept in that pocket every day for as long as I could remember, and she wrote something. One word. She slid the napkin slowly across the table toward me. The table went quiet. Not all at once, gradually, the way a room quiets when it senses that something is happening it doesn't understand yet. I looked down at the napkin. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Before I tell you what that word was, please take a second to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments what country you are watching from. Now, let's begin. My name is Caroline Webb. I am 28 years old. And for 8 months before that Christmas dinner, I had been the only person in my family who understood that my grandmother was not disappearing. She was grieving. There is a difference between those two things. It is a difference that should be obvious, but apparently isn't. Not when the person grieving is 81 years old and has stopped speaking and sits quietly through every meal and lets the conversations happen around her without joining them. To my uncle and my aunt, and honestly to my own mother, that picture looked like decline. It looked like the beginning of something medical and irreversible that required a brochure and a spring timeline. To me, it looked like a woman who had lost the person she had spoken to every day for 57 years and simply did not yet know how to fill that silence with anyone else. I had been going to see her every Sunday since Harold died. Not because anyone asked me to. Not because I had a plan or a purpose. Just because she was my grandmother and she was in that house alone, and I was not willing to be the kind of person who let that be true without showing up. Most Sundays, we didn't talk much. I would make tea, and we would sit in the living room, the one with the old couch and Harold's reading chair, which no one sat in but which no one had moved either, and sometimes I would read out loud, and sometimes I would just sit near her, and sometimes she would look at me in a way that said more than any of the words she wasn't using. She was still entirely herself. That was what I needed my family to understand. She remembered everything. She tracked conversations. She noticed when something changed in the house. She noticed, I was certain, every word of every discussion my uncle had conducted in her presence about Meadowbrook and spring timelines and property assessments. She simply had nothing she wanted to say to the people saying those things. I was not sure I could blame her. Harold Webb had been a quiet man who did large things without making a production of them. He had worked for 34 years as an electrician. He had built the porch on the back of the house with his own hands the summer my mother was 12. He had driven to my school when I was 9 and was being bullied by an older girl, and he had sat outside in the car for 45 minutes until I came out, and then he had taken me for ice cream and listened to the whole story without interrupting once, and when I finished he had said, "People who try to make you feel small are usually scared you'll figure out how tall you actually are." I had never forgotten that. He had been diagnosed with a progressive heart condition 3 years before he died. He had handled that information the way he handled everything, quietly, practically, without theater. He had organized his affairs. He had spent time on things that mattered to him. He had sat on the porch every morning with his coffee regardless of weather because he had always done that, and he saw no reason to stop. And sometime in those 3 years, in the particular way of a man who thought far ahead and said little about it, he had done something that no one in the family knew about. I didn't know it either. Not yet. At the Christmas table, the Meadowbrook conversation continued around my grandmother, like weather around a mountain. My Uncle Robert had the brochure with him. He had actually brought it to Christmas dinner, which told me something about his intentions for the evening. He spread it open on the table beside the dessert dishes with the comfortable authority of someone who considered himself the decision-maker of the family. "The rooms are very nice," my Aunt Susan said, in the voice she used when she was agreeing with something she had already agreed with in private. "And there's a garden. Would have a garden." My mother looked at the brochure and said nothing, which was her way of agreeing with things she wasn't certain about. I looked at Grandma. She was looking at the brochure. Her expression was still. Not sad, not angry, the particular stillness of someone who is observing rather than reacting, who is choosing not to give the situation the reaction it is angling for. I started to say something. I opened my mouth, and that was when she reached for the napkin. The table slowed. The dessert forks paused. My uncle stopped mid-sentence. She wrote with the steadiness of someone who had decided, and the room was quiet enough that we could all hear the faint scratch of the pen against the paper. One word. She slid it toward me. I looked down. The word was Harold. For a moment, I just looked at it. Then I looked at her. She held my eyes for 3 full seconds with those sharp gray eyes that had always seen more than they let on. Then she glanced upward, barely a movement, barely a gesture, toward the ceiling. Upstairs. I understood. I stood up from the table. "Excuse me for a minute," I said, to no one in particular. I heard my uncle start to say something. I didn't stay to hear it. The attic stairs were at the end of the upstairs hallway, behind a door that had always stuck slightly in winter. I pulled it open and climbed into the cold and the smell of dust and old wood and decades of accumulated storage. I had been up here before, as a child mostly, on rainy days when Harold would let me explore among the boxes and old furniture. I had not been up here since he died. I didn't know what I was looking for. I only knew she had sent me here. I found it on the second shelf of the metal shelving unit Harold had installed along the far wall, in a gray metal box with a small combination lock, the kind with a 4-digit number. I stood in front of it for a moment. Then I typed in the only number I could think of, 1225. Christmas. The lock opened. Inside the box was a brown envelope with my name written on the front in Harold's handwriting. And beneath it, a set of documents in a clear plastic folder, paper clipped together with a business card from an attorney's office on Anderson Street. I opened the envelope first. His handwriting was deliberate and unhurried, the way everything about Harold had been deliberate and unhurried. "Caroline, if you are reading this, then Dorothy sent you upstairs, which means she decided the time was right. I trust her judgment on that more than I trust anyone else's on almost anything. I am going to tell you something I should probably have told you in person, but I was never very good at making things dramatic, and I didn't want to start now. Your aunt and uncle are decent people, but they have always been more interested in what things are worth than in what things mean. Dorothy knows this. I have known it for a long time. The documents in the folder explain everything. I had Walter Morrison put it together 3 years ago, when we got the diagnosis. The house stays. Dorothy stays in the house, for as long as she wants to be in it. I named you trustee because you show up. You've been showing up your whole life, and I don't think you even know it. I need someone who will keep showing up. Tell her I said she can stop being quiet now, whenever she's ready. I know she's in there. Harold." I sat on the attic floor for a long time with that letter in my hands. Then I opened the plastic folder. Harold had established a trust 3 years earlier, funded with the house, the savings accounts, and a life insurance policy that I had not known existed. The trust directed that Dorothy Webb would remain in her home for the remainder of her life, with all associated costs covered. It directed that no property sale, No facility placement and no major financial decision regarding Dorothy Webb could be made without the authorization of the named trustee. The named trustee was me. Not my uncle. Not my aunt. Not my mother.
Me.
Harold had seen everything. He had understood the shape of what would happen after he was gone, and he had built something, quietly, practically, the way he built everything that would hold against it. I came back downstairs with the folder in my hands. The table had not moved on to other topics. My uncle was still talking, something about the practical considerations of waiting too long to make decisions, about being realistic, about what was best for everyone. I set the folder on the table. I said, as evenly as I could manage, "I think you should look at this before we finalize anything." My uncle picked it up with the mild confidence of someone who expected to be unimpressed. He read the first page. Then he read it again. Then he set it down and looked at me, and looked at my grandmother, and looked at the folder again, and for a long moment he said absolutely nothing. My Aunt Susan tried to look at the document. He moved it slightly, instinctively, like he wasn't ready to share the experience yet. My mother looked at me. Her expression shifted through several things quickly: surprise, understanding, something that looked like relief. I looked at Grandma.
She was looking at me.
And then, for the first time in 8 months, she smiled. Not a large smile. Not a performance. A small, certain, utterly private smile that said, "I knew you'd find it. I knew you'd know what to do." It is now 14 months since that Christmas. Grandma is still in her house, in the same neighborhood she has lived in for 41 years, with the same garden and the same porch and the same old furnace that keeps December warm. She started speaking again in February. Not all at once. A word here, a sentence there. By April, she was on the phone with her friend Patricia every Thursday. By summer, she was telling Harold stories at the dinner table. The good ones, the funny ones, the ones that made him real again in a room instead of just absent from it. She still keeps the pen in her cardigan pocket. I asked her once, on a Sunday afternoon last spring, why she had stayed quiet for so long. She thought about it for a moment. Then she said, "Because I had nothing left to say to people who weren't listening. And I had already said everything that mattered to the one person I wanted to say it to." She paused.
"I was waiting," she said,
"for someone who would actually hear it." I think about Harold choosing Christmas. I think about him knowing, somehow, that she would wait for the right moment, and that the right moment would be that table, that dinner, that particular conversation. I think about a man who spent his life doing large things quietly and who, at the end of it, did the largest quiet thing of all. He built something that would protect the person he loved most, and he left it for the person he trusted most to find. He built it for a person who showed up. There is no wisdom I have found, in 28 years, more worth carrying than that. Show up. Not when it's convenient. Not when there's something to gain from it. Show up when the person needs someone present in the room, even when the room is quiet and the conversation is thin, and the easiest thing would be to call instead of drive. Show up and keep showing up, and trust that the people who matter are watching, and that they will find a way when it counts to make sure you know it. Harold did. In a locked box in a cold attic on a Christmas evening, he found a way.